Picture a city built with astonishing precision, streets laid out in perfect grids, homes equipped with advanced drainage systems, and public baths that hint at a society far ahead of its time. This wasn't some futuristic metropolis. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, flourishing over 4,000 years ago along the banks of the mighty Indus River. Yet, despite their incredible achievements, these people vanished almost without a trace, leaving behind crumbling ruins and a mystery that has puzzled historians for centuries. How could such an advanced society simply disappear? What forces, natural or man-made, could have erased one of the ancient world's greatest cultures? The answers lie buried in the dust of time, waiting to be uncovered. Imagine walking through the silent streets of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, two of the civilization's grandest cities. The air is thick with the weight of history, every brick whispering secrets of a people who mastered urban planning, trade, and artistry long before many other civilizations even began. But then, something went terribly wrong. By around 1900 BC, the bustling markets fell quiet. The meticulously engineered waterways ran dry, and the people who once thrived here were gone. No great battle cry echoes from their past, no final warning etched into their walls, just silence. What happened? Was it a shifting climate that turned their fertile lands to dust? Did invaders sweep through their streets, or did their own society collapse from within? Today, we're piecing together the fragments of this ancient puzzle. From the artifacts they left behind to the clues hidden in their architecture, every detail brings us closer to understanding their fate. This isn't just a story of a lost civilization, it's a detective story, one that challenges us to rethink what we know about resilience, survival, and the fragile balance between humans and their environment. As we explore the leading theories, you'll see how the past isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a living, breathing mystery, and the disappearance of the Indus Valley people might hold lessons that resonate even in our modern world. So let's step into the shadows of history and uncover the truth behind one of antiquity's most haunting questions. Long before the pyramids of Egypt rose from the desert sands or the great cities of Mesopotamia dominated the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley Civilization was already laying the foundations of urban life. Around 3300 BCE, in what is now modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, this remarkable society began to flourish along the life-giving waters of the Indus River. What set them apart wasn't just their early start, it was their astonishing sophistication. Unlike other ancient cultures that grew haphazardly, the Indus Valley people built their cities with meticulous precision. Take Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, their crown jewels. These weren't just clusters of homes, they were masterpieces of urban design. Wide streets ran in perfect grids, intersecting at right angles like a modern city block. Houses were made of uniform baked bricks, many with private wells and bathrooms connected to a complex underground drainage system, a luxury even some modern cities struggle to maintain. But it wasn't just their engineering that dazzled. The Indus Valley people were master craftsmen, creating intricate jewelry, delicate pottery, and small, enigmatic seals carved with symbols we still can't fully decipher. These artifacts tell us something extraordinary. This was a society that valued artistry, trade, and perhaps even a form of written communication. Their influence stretched far beyond their borders. Archaeologists have found Indus Valley seals in Mesopotamia, proof of a thriving trade network that connected them to distant civilizations. Imagine merchants from the Indus Valley sailing across the Arabian Sea, exchanging goods like cotton, precious stones, and finely crafted tools with the people of ancient Sumer. This wasn't just commerce, it was cultural exchange on a grand scale, evidence of a civilization confident enough to reach across the known world. What's even more striking is the sense of order that pervaded their society. Unlike other ancient cultures ruled by warrior kings or god-like pharaohs, the Indus Valley people left behind no grand palaces or towering monuments to power. Instead, their cities suggest something rare for the time: a focus on communal living, public granaries stored food for all, and the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a massive, watertight pool, hints at shared rituals or social gatherings. Was this a society that valued equality over hierarchy, a place where merchants and craftsmen held as much sway as priests or rulers? The clues are there, buried in the ruins, waiting for us to piece together their story. Yet for all their achievements, the most haunting question remains: how could a civilization this advanced, this interconnected, simply vanish? To understand their collapse, we first need to appreciate just how high they soared. Their cities were marvels of the ancient world, their trade networks vast, their craftsmanship unmatched. But as we'll soon see, even the mightiest civilizations are not immune to the forces of nature, human conflict, or the slow unraveling of social order. The Indus Valley people built a world that should have lasted for millennia. So what went wrong? At its peak, the Indus Valley Civilization was a beacon of stability and innovation in the ancient world. While other societies were still struggling with basic governance, these people had perfected a system so balanced that it left little room for the chaos that plagued so many early cultures. Walk through the ruins of their cities, and you won't find towering statues glorifying kings or grand temples built on the backs of slaves. Instead, you see something almost revolutionary, a society where daily life seemed designed for the many, not just the powerful few. Take their weights and measures, for example. Archaeologists have uncovered tiny, carefully crafted stone cubes used for trade, each one standardized across the entire civilization. Whether you were in Mohenjo-Daro or a smaller outpost hundreds of miles away, a merchant knew exactly how much grain or gold they were buying. This wasn't just practical, it was a radical commitment to fairness, a system built on trust and precision. Then there's the art, from delicate clay figurines of women adorned with elaborate headdresses to the famous dancing girl statue, her confident pose frozen in bronze. These creations reveal a culture that celebrated beauty and craftsmanship. Even their pottery tells a story, with designs so consistent across regions that scholars believe they shared a unified artistic language. But perhaps the most tantalizing clue to their sophistication lies in those small, square seals carved with mysterious symbols. To this day, no one has fully cracked the Indus script. Some think it was a form of writing, others a system of merchants' marks. Whatever the truth, these symbols appear everywhere, on pottery, tools, even clay tablets, hinting at a level of organization or record-keeping that rivals civilizations like ancient Egypt. What's even more striking is what's missing from their ruins. Unlike Mesopotamia, where battle scenes decorate palace walls, or Egypt, with its monuments to conquest, the Indus Valley shows almost no signs of large-scale warfare. No mass graves filled with weapons, no fortifications built for defense. Their cities were open, designed for commerce and community, not conflict. Even their homes suggest surprising equality. While some are slightly larger, there's no evidence of the vast wealth gaps seen in other ancient societies. Was this a culture that rejected the idea of rulers and ruled? A place where decisions were made collectively? The evidence leans that way, painting a picture of a society that thrived on cooperation rather than coercion. Yet this very harmony makes their disappearance all the more baffling. Civilizations built on inequality often collapse when the oppressed rise up or external enemies strike. But the Indus Valley people seem to have avoided those pitfalls. Their cities were models of resilience, their trade networks robust, their technology advanced. So what could have shaken a society this stable? The answer may lie not in their weaknesses, but in their strengths and in forces beyond any civilization's control. As we'll see next, even the most carefully balanced societies can be undone by the whims of nature or the slow creep of change. The Indus Valley didn't just vanish overnight. Its fall was a quiet unraveling, a lesson in how easily prosperity can slip away. Even the most advanced civilizations are at the mercy of their environment, and the Indus Valley people were no exception. Beneath their carefully planned cities and thriving trade networks, a silent threat was growing, one that no amount of engineering could fully control. Geological evidence tells us that around 4,000 years ago, the climate of the region began to shift. The mighty Gagha-Hakra River, once a lifeline for hundreds of settlements, started to dry up. Satellite images and soil samples reveal its ancient course, now just a ghostly imprint in the earth. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, creeping disaster. Imagine farmers watching their fields wither season after season, the riverbanks receding further each year, until what was once fertile land became cracked and barren. Deforestation may have accelerated the crisis. As the population grew, trees were cut for fuel, construction, and farmland, leaving the soil exposed. Without roots to hold it in place, topsoil eroded, and floods, when they came, were more destructive, washing away precious nutrients. Archaeologists have found layers of silt in Mohenjo-Daro's ruins, suggesting repeated flooding that damaged infrastructure and contaminated water supplies. At the same time, over-farming drained the land's fertility. Crop yields dwindled, and with fewer harvests to sustain them, the people faced a desperate choice: adapt or abandon their homes. The signs of strain appear in the archaeological record. In later layers of Indus Valley cities, buildings were repaired with poorer quality materials. Streets once meticulously maintained showed signs of neglect. Some settlements were abandoned altogether, their populations likely dispersing to smaller, scattered villages where survival was easier. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual retreat, as centuries of environmental pressure chipped away at the civilization's foundations. The very rivers that had nurtured their rise now seemed to betray them, their unpredictable flows making the once reliable agricultural system untenable. Yet climate alone doesn't tell the whole story. While some cities declined, others persisted, adapting to the changing landscape. If environmental stress was the sole culprit, why didn't the entire civilization collapse uniformly? This lingering question leads us to the next piece of the puzzle: human factors that may have deepened the crisis. Because even in the face of nature's unpredictability, societies often hold the power to endure or unravel through the choices they make. The Indus Valley people's fate may have been sealed not just by the rivers that vanished, but by how they responded when the waters began to fade. For decades, one theory has loomed large over the mystery of the Indus Valley's decline: the idea that waves of nomadic warriors, known as the Aryans, swept through the region and overthrew its cities. This Aryan invasion theory was once widely accepted, painting a dramatic picture of horse-riding outsiders descending from the north, their chariots crushing a peaceful civilization underfoot. But as archaeologists dug deeper, the evidence began to unravel. Where were the burned fortifications, the mass graves, the shattered weapons that should mark such a violent conquest? The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa show no signs of large-scale destruction. Instead of layers of ash and rubble, we find cities that seem to have been slowly abandoned, their buildings crumbling from neglect rather than conflict. Linguistic clues add another layer of intrigue. The Sanskrit language brought by the Aryans according to the old theory shares striking similarities with the symbols found on Indus Valley seals. Some scholars argue these symbols could represent an early form of writing, a bridge between the Indus script and later Indian languages. If true, this suggests not a sudden invasion but a slow blending of cultures where ideas and traditions merged over generations. Even the Rig Veda, the ancient Aryan texts once thought to celebrate their conquest, contains hymns that might describe the drying of rivers, echoing the environmental crisis the Indus people faced. Could these nomadic groups have arrived not as destroyers, but as migrants drawn to a fading civilization's remaining resources? The debate takes another turn when we examine the artifacts left behind. While the Aryans are often associated with horses and chariots, no horse remains have been found in mature Indus Valley settlements. Their iconic seals depict bulls and elephants, not the steeds of nomadic warriors. And if the Aryans did dominate the region, why did so many elements of Indus culture, like their reverence for water and ritual bathing, persist and evolve into later Hindu traditions? The more we examine the evidence, the less it fits the old invasion narrative. This isn't to say the Aryans played no role in the region's transformation. But their arrival might have been less like a thunderbolt and more like a slow tide, blending with local populations rather than erasing them. The real story could be one of adaptation, where climate change and social shifts created openings for new influences to take root. After all, civilizations rarely end with a single catastrophe. More often, they fade, transform, or merge into something new, leaving behind not just ruins, but legacies woven into the fabric of history. Perhaps the most insidious threat to the Indus Valley people wasn't an invading army or a shifting river, but something far smaller and deadlier, hidden within the bones of their buried dead. Archaeologists have uncovered unsettling clues. Skeletons from the civilization's later periods show troubling signs of malnutrition, with teeth worn down by coarse, grain-heavy diets and spines curved from years of hard labor. Even more telling are the microscopic traces of disease, lesions on bones that hint at chronic infections, or evidence of tuberculosis lurking in crowded urban centers. Could an invisible killer have stalked the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, thinning its population long before the final abandonment? The parallels to other ancient collapses are striking. Centuries later, the plague of Athens would ravage one of Greece's greatest cities, weakening its military and sowing chaos just as Sparta pressed its advantage. In Rome, recurring outbreaks of malaria and smallpox chipped away at the empire's strength, leaving it vulnerable to external pressures. Disease has always been civilization's silent partner, a force that needs no swords or spears to bring societies to their knees. For the Indus Valley, densely packed cities with advanced drainage might have ironically created the perfect breeding ground for disaster. Those same waterways that carried waste away could have also spread waterborne illnesses like cholera or dysentery, especially as environmental stresses contaminated supplies. But here's where the mystery deepens. Unlike Athens or Rome, where written records describe waves of sickness, the Indus Valley left no such accounts. Their script remains undeciphered, leaving scientists to piece together the story from bones and soil samples. In one Harappan burial site, a cluster of skeletons shows signs of violent trauma, yet no evidence of widespread warfare exists elsewhere. Could this be a glimpse of social breakdown as disease and famine sparked unrest? Or were these victims of a desperate act, a community pushed to the edge by forces they couldn't control? The true impact of epidemics may lie not just in death tolls, but in the fraying of social fabric. Imagine priests unable to perform rituals as illness emptied temples, or farmers too weakened to harvest crops, triggering food shortages. Trade networks reliant on healthy merchants would have sputtered, disrupting the flow of goods that bound distant cities together. Even the famed standardization of weights and measures might have collapsed as oversight grew lax, eroding the trust that held their economy together. A civilization built on precision and order could unravel rapidly if too many hands went missing from the loom, yet disease rarely acts alone. Like a spark in dry tinder, it thrives on existing vulnerabilities. The malnutrition seen in skeletal remains suggests food systems were already strained, perhaps by failing harvests or overpopulation. Infections would have spread faster among the malnourished, just as social tensions flared in times of scarcity. This isn't a story with a single villain, but a cascade of interlocking crises. The Indus Valley people may have faced not just one silent killer, but many, each one amplifying the others until the weight became too heavy to bear. Their greatest strength, the dense, interconnected urban life they pioneered, might have ultimately been their undoing, proving that even the most advanced societies are never truly safe from nature's smallest and most relentless adversaries. Trade was the lifeblood of the Indus Valley Civilization, the invisible thread connecting their cities to distant lands. At their height, their merchants sailed across the Arabian Sea, exchanging finely crafted beads, cotton textiles, and ivory with the bustling markets of Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have found Indus Valley seals in the ruins of ancient Ur, proof of a thriving economic partnership that spanned thousands of miles. But around 1900 BC, something changed. Mesopotamian records suddenly stopped mentioning trade with Meluha, their name for the Indus region. At the same time, the quality of Indus Valley artifacts began to decline. Intricately carved seals gave way to cruder imitations, and the once uniform weights used in trade became irregular. It's as if the master craftsmen had vanished, leaving behind only echoes of their skill. This wasn't just a matter of lost artistry, it was a symptom of a deeper crisis. Without steady trade, the Indus Valley would have faced shortages of critical goods like copper and tin, essential for making tools and weapons. Local workshops, once buzzing with activity, might have fallen silent as raw materials grew scarce. Imagine a potter unable to find clay, or a metalworker with nothing to forge. The economic ripple effects would have been devastating. Taxes collected from trade could no longer fund public projects, leading to crumbling infrastructure. Priests and administrators whose authority depended on distributing resources would have seen their power wane. Even the famed standardization of weights, a hallmark of their fairness, began to fracture, suggesting a breakdown in the systems that held their society together. But the most telling clue lies in what archaeologists don't find. In later layers of Indus cities, imported luxuries like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan or carnelian from Gujarat disappear entirely. These weren't just trinkets, they were status symbols, gifts exchanged between elites to cement alliances. Their absence hints at a fraying web of relationships, both economic and political. As trade dried up, competition over dwindling resources likely intensified. Scattered evidence of burned buildings and hastily abandoned workshops points to localized violence, not full-scale war, but skirmishes born of desperation. A society built on cooperation and shared prosperity might have splintered into factions, each fighting for survival as the old rules collapsed. The tragedy is that this decline wasn't inevitable. The Indus Valley people had weathered challenges before, adapting their farming techniques and shifting settlements as rivers changed course. But this time, the pressures piled up too fast. Environmental stress, lost trade, and perhaps even the spread of disease. Like a tree slowly starved of water, their civilization didn't topple in a single storm. It withered, branch by branch, until only the roots remained. And yet those roots ran deep. Even as their cities emptied, their ideas lived on. The reverence for water seen in their great bath echoes in Hindu rituals today. Their love of storytelling, hinted at by those enigmatic seals, might have woven itself into the fabric of South Asian culture. The Indus Valley people didn't truly vanish. They transformed, leaving behind not just ruins, but a legacy etched into history itself. What if the greatest weakness of the Indus Valley civilization was also its greatest strength? Unlike the towering pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, their cities lacked monumental palaces or temples, no grand tombs filled with gold, no colossal statues of kings. This absence speaks volumes. Most ancient societies centralized power in the hands of a few, building their legitimacy through displays of might and divine connection. But the Indus Valley people seemed to reject this model. Their cities thrived on collective effort, standardized bricks, shared drainage systems, public granaries, all suggesting a society where authority was distributed, not concentrated. For centuries, this egalitarian approach worked beautifully until it didn't. Archaeologists have uncovered subtle clues of social unraveling in the civilization's final chapters. At Mohenjo-Daro, later construction phases show a troubling shift. Once uniform neighborhoods splintered into haphazard clusters, with wealthier families walling off sections of streets for private use. The meticulous grid of the lower city gave way to encroachments and narrow alleyways, as if the old rules no longer held sway. Even the iconic Great Bath, likely a communal gathering place, shows signs of neglect in its upper layers. This wasn't just urban decay, it was the fraying of a social contract. Without a strong central authority to maintain order or redistribute resources during crises, dissent may have festered. Farmers angry over failing harvests, artisans displaced by lost trade routes, or marginalized groups left out of decision-making could have turned on each other as hardships mounted. Compare this to other ancient collapses. When drought struck pharaonic Egypt, the ruling class could command labor to dig canals or ration grain from state storehouses, at least for a while. The Maya kings, though often brutal, mobilized vast workforces to adapt their cities to changing climates. But in the Indus Valley, where leadership appears to have been decentralized, coordinated responses to disaster might have been nearly impossible. Imagine a council of elders trying to rally a starving population with no army to enforce orders, no treasury to fund relief, and no temples to offer divine reassurance. Their system, so effective in times of plenty, may have lacked the tools to navigate catastrophe. Yet there's a haunting irony here. The very equality that made their society remarkable could have sowed the seeds of its dissolution. In times of crisis, people often turn to strong leaders, real or imagined, promising salvation. The Indus Valley's collective governance left no room for such figures. No warrior kings rose to defend their cities. No god kings claimed the power to restore balance. Instead, as resources dwindled, communities likely fractured along kinship or occupational lines, each group prioritizing its own survival. The archaeological record hints at this slow fragmentation, not with the ash of conquest, but with the quiet clutter of households retreating inward, hoarding goods rather than sharing them. This raises a profound question about resilience. Societies built on tyranny often collapse when oppressed populations revolt or rulers grow corrupt. But the Indus Valley suggests another vulnerability when power is too diffuse, when no one has the authority or means to steer through the storm. Their cities didn't fall to invaders or rebellion in the traditional sense. They simply emptied, people walked away from their homes not because they were driven out, but because the systems that bound them together could no longer hold. In the end, the Indus Valley's greatest experiment, a civilization built on cooperation rather than coercion, may have been both its triumph and its undoing. Their ruins stand as a silent testament to a radical idea that societies can flourish without kings or conquests, but they also warn us that even the fairest systems must find ways to endure when the world itself begins to unravel. Perhaps the Indus Valley people never truly vanished, they simply changed. Across South Asia, echoes of their civilization appear in unexpected places, like fragments of a story rewritten but never erased. Take the pottery unearthed in later Gandhara and cemetery H cultures. The geometric patterns, the careful symmetry, these aren't just random designs. They're artistic DNA, a visual thread connecting these later communities to the Indus Valley's craftsmanship. Even the way clay was fired, the thickness of the walls, the shapes of the jars, all bear the subtle imprint of an older tradition, adapted but not abandoned. Then there's the spiritual legacy. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, with its precise engineering and ritual significance, finds an uncanny parallel in Hindu purification rituals centuries later. The reverence for water, the idea of ceremonial cleansing, could these practices have roots in Indus Valley traditions? Even the iconic seals depicting meditative figures seated in lotus-like positions evoke later yogic postures. It's as if the spiritual imagination of the Indus people seeped into the cultural groundwater, resurfacing in new forms long after their cities fell silent. But the most compelling evidence lies in everyday life. The standardized weights and measures of the Indus Valley didn't disappear, they evolved. Later societies in the region adopted similar systems, tweaking them but keeping the core principle, fairness in trade. The Indus preference for urban planning, for cities built around shared spaces rather than royal monuments, also reappears in ancient Indian texts describing ideal settlements. Even their love of storytelling, hinted at by those enigmatic seals, might have woven itself into the oral traditions that eventually became India's epic poems. This isn't to say the transition was smooth or peaceful. Cultural blending rarely is. The arrival of new groups, whether the Aryans or others, would have brought tension, negotiation, and slow adaptation. Languages merged, rituals hybridized, and power structures shifted. Yet beneath these changes, something essential endured. The Indus Valley people may have stopped building their grid-patterned cities, but their ideas, their aesthetics, their way of organizing the world didn't vanish. They went underground, resurfacing in the customs, art, and beliefs of later civilizations. So when we ask what happened to the Indus Valley people, perhaps we're asking the wrong question. They didn't disappear, they transformed. Their story isn't one of abrupt endings, but of quiet persistence. Like a river that changes course but still reaches the sea, their influence flowed into new channels, shaping the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro aren't just a grave marker, they're a seedbed, proof that even the most dramatic collapses can't erase a culture's deepest imprint. The mystery of the Indus Valley's disappearance is made even more elusive by the gaps in the archaeological record. Imagine trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing. That's the challenge historians face when piecing together this ancient civilization's final chapters. While we've uncovered remarkable sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, these represent only a fraction of their world. Rising sea levels over millennia may have swallowed entire coastal settlements, taking with them crucial clues about trade networks, migration patterns, or even catastrophic events that could explain their decline. The Arabian Sea's shoreline has shifted dramatically since their time, and with it, potentially vital evidence now lies underwater, buried under layers of silt and sand. Even on land, the record is frustratingly incomplete. The Indus script, etched onto those famous seals, remains undeciphered, a silent language that could hold the key to understanding their politics, religion, or daily struggles. Without it, we're left reading between the lines of material culture, interpreting broken pottery and crumbling bricks like detectives with half a case file. Take the so-called massacre layer at Mohenjo-Daro, where scattered skeletons once sparked theories of a violent end. Later analysis revealed these bones weren't from a single event but accumulated over centuries, leaving us with more questions than answers. Were these victims of conflict, disease, or something else entirely? The truth slips through our fingers like the sands of the Indus itself. This uncertainty isn't just about missing artifacts, it's about context. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where rulers left boastful inscriptions documenting wars and droughts, the Indus Valley's egalitarian society left no such proclamations. Their humility, once a strength, now obscures their story. Even radiocarbon dating, usually a reliable tool, becomes tricky here. Samples from different layers of the same city sometimes yield wildly varying dates, suggesting periods of abandonment and reoccupation that blur the timeline of their collapse. Was it a slow fade or a series of crises? The soil holds conflicting stories, yet these gaps aren't just obstacles, they're invitations. Every unanswered question encourages us to look deeper, to weigh evidence with humility. The absence of horse remains in mature Indus cities challenges old invasion theories, while traces of millet in late period cooking pots hint at adaptations to drier climates. Even the silence speaks volumes. The fact that later cultures adopted Indus innovations like standardized weights or water rituals suggests their influence outlived their cities. Archaeology isn't just about what we find, it's about learning to listen to the whispers between the artifacts, the spaces where history breathes. As we explore the next clues, remember, the mystery isn't a flaw in the story. It's what makes the search for answers so compelling. In the labyrinthine streets of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists made a chilling discovery: clusters of human skeletons scattered haphazardly, some lying in open areas, others crumpled in narrow alleyways. These weren't orderly burials. One group of skeletons was found huddled together near a well, their bones frozen in postures that suggested sudden, violent death. When these remains were first uncovered in the 1920s, researchers immediately labeled it the massacre layer, conjuring images of invaders storming the city, cutting down its inhabitants in a final, bloody reckoning. But as with so much about the Indus Valley, the truth is far more complicated. Recent re-examinations of these skeletons tell a different story. Forensic analysis reveals no clear signs of weapon injuries, no arrowheads lodged in ribs, no skulls fractured by blunt force. Instead, some bones show discoloration and unusual erosion patterns, hinting at prolonged exposure to water or chemical contamination. Could these people have succumbed to a flood or toxic event rather than warfare? Even more perplexing, radiocarbon dating suggests these deaths didn't all occur simultaneously. The skeletons appear to span decades, possibly even centuries, like a slow-motion tragedy rather than a single catastrophic event. The debate takes another turn when we consider the cultural context. Unlike other ancient cities where mass graves clearly mark conquest, like the fallen warriors of Troy, Mohenjo-Daro's skeletons lack the expected trappings of battle. No weapons lie beside them, no armor clutched in their hands. Some researchers argue these could be ritual deposits, perhaps linked to funerary practices we don't yet understand. In the ancient Near East, certain cultures placed bodies in waterways as offerings. Could the Indus Valley people have followed a similar tradition, their remains eventually washing into streets during floods? Others propose a grimmer scenario, that these were victims of a pandemic, their bodies abandoned in haste during outbreaks too overwhelming for proper burials. What makes this mystery so pivotal isn't just the question of how these individuals died, it's what their fate says about the civilization's collapse. If this were a massacre, where are the burned buildings, the broken gates, the layers of ash that typically accompany violent conquests? The city's infrastructure shows no signs of large-scale destruction. Conversely, if these deaths resulted from environmental disaster or disease, why don't we find comparable skeletal clusters in other Indus Valley cities? The inconsistencies force us to reconsider old narratives. Maybe Mohenjo-Daro's decline wasn't dictated by a single cause, but by a tangle of misfortunes, dwindling resources pushing communities to the brink, isolated conflicts erupting in desperation, and a once orderly society fracturing under the weight of cascading crises. The massacre layer may not hold the smoking gun of the Indus Valley's disappearance, but it offers something equally valuable, a reminder that history's darkest chapters are rarely simple. These skeletons, whether felled by violence, disaster, or some unseen calamity, are more than evidence. They're silent witnesses to a civilization's fragility. Their ambiguous fate mirrors the broader puzzle of the Indus Valley's end, where every answer seems to dissolve into new questions the closer we look. And perhaps that's the most haunting lesson of all, that even the most advanced societies leave behind shadows we may never fully illuminate. Ancient texts and modern satellites tell a startling story, one that might hold the key to the Indus Valley's mysterious decline. For centuries, Hindu scriptures like the Rig Veda sang praises of the Saraswati, a mighty river surpassing all others in grandeur, flowing from the mountains to the sea. But by the time these hymns were written down, the Saraswati had already vanished from the landscape, leaving only its memory woven into myth. Today, cutting-edge technology is revealing the truth behind the legend. Satellite images and ground-penetrating radar trace the ghostly outline of an enormous riverbed, its dried-up channels snaking across what's now the Thar Desert. This wasn't just any river. Geologists estimate it once carried 3 times more water than the Indus, nourishing thousands of settlements along its banks. The implications are staggering. If the Saraswati's waters suddenly failed, the effect on the civilization would have been catastrophic. Imagine entire cities built along its shores, their farms and wells dependent on its seasonal floods. As the river dwindled, whether from tectonic shifts diverting its headwaters or climate change drying its tributaries, the breadbasket of the Indus Valley would have turned to dust. Archaeologists have found clusters of abandoned settlements along these ancient river channels, their ruins eerily aligned with the satellite data. At the site of Kalibangan, for instance, plowed fields from 4,000 years ago lie preserved under layers of sand, their furrows still visible, a frozen moment when the water stopped coming and the crops withered in the sun. What makes this discovery so compelling is how it bridges science and tradition. The Vedic descriptions of the Saraswati, its course, its seasonal floods, match the geological evidence with uncanny precision. One hymn even laments the river's disappearance, describing it as dwindling to invisibility underground, a poetic echo of what hydrologists now confirm. The Saraswati's remnants still flow beneath the desert as groundwater. This isn't just a case of myth reflecting reality. It's a rare glimpse of ancient memory preserving an ecological disaster across millennia. Yet the river's fate raises as many questions as it answers. Why did some Indus Valley cities survive longer than others after its decline? The answer may lie in adaptation. Along the Ghaggar-Hakra River system, thought to be the Saraswati's final remnant settlements show signs of desperate ingenuity. Wells were dug deeper, crops shifted from water-intensive wheat to drought-resistant millet, and trade routes redirected toward the still-flowing Indus. But these stopgap measures couldn't compensate for the loss of an entire river network. Like a tree whose roots are slowly severed, the civilization's connections frayed. Villages closer to the Indus clung on, while those deeper in the Saraswati's former basin were abandoned, creating a patchwork of survival and collapse. The Saraswati story is more than an environmental cautionary tale. It's a reminder of how intimately human fortunes are tied to the land. The same river that enabled the Indus Valley's golden age may have sealed its downfall when it vanished. Yet even in its absence, the Saraswati left an indelible mark. Its name lives on in prayers, its waters now hidden still sustain communities, and its ghostly course continues to guide archaeologists to lost chapters of history. The river may have disappeared, but its legacy, like the civilization it nurtured, endures in ways both seen and unseen. At their height, the Indus Valley people were pioneers, masters of urban planning, who designed cities with sewer systems rivaling those of modern metropolises. Their standardized bricks fit together with millimeter precision, and their intricate seals displayed craftsmanship that still impresses archaeologists today. But around 1900 BCE, something curious happened, or rather, didn't happen. The flood of innovations that had defined their civilization slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Later layers of excavation reveal a startling pattern. The same tools, the same techniques, even the same pottery designs repeating for centuries without improvement. It's as if the civilization's creative spark flickered out, leaving them to recycle old ideas while the world around them changed. This technological stagnation stands in stark contrast to their earlier brilliance. Take their water management systems. Early Indus engineers built gravity-fed drains that could rival Roman aqueducts, yet later settlements show no upgrades to these designs, even as environmental pressures mounted. When the Gagga-Hakra River began drying up, they didn't develop new irrigation methods. They simply dug deeper wells until the water ran out. Their iconic seals, once carved with exquisite detail, became cruder over time, as if the skills to make them were being forgotten. Even their urban layouts, once models of efficiency, show signs of haphazard modifications, with new buildings crammed into spaces never meant to hold them. What caused this creative freeze? One possibility is resource scarcity. As copper and tin grew harder to obtain, metalworkers might have hoarded materials rather than experimenting with new techniques. But there's another, more unsettling explanation: complacency. Societies that achieve early success sometimes become prisoners of their own achievements. The Indus Valley's standardized systems worked so well for so long that there may have been little incentive to innovate. Why fix what isn't broken until it suddenly is? This pattern echoes other civilizations that collapsed after peaking too soon. The Romans, for instance, relied on slave labor for so long that they lagged in mechanization, while Imperial China's early lead in navigation withered when conservative rulers banned ocean voyages. Progress, it seems, isn't just about inventing, it's about never stopping. Yet the Indus Valley's stagnation carries a unique warning. Unlike Rome or China, they lacked a central authority to enforce conformity. Their decline suggests something subtler, a cultural exhaustion where a society's shared imagination simply runs dry. Imagine generations of artisans copying their ancestors' designs without question, or engineers maintaining drains but never improving them. Innovation requires more than just resources. It needs curiosity, risk-taking, and the freedom to challenge tradition. The Indus Valley's greatest strength, their egalitarian stability, might have inadvertently smothered the very creativity that built their civilization. The lesson here isn't just about ancient history. It's about the delicate balance between order and innovation, between preserving what works and daring to imagine what could work better. The Indus Valley people remind us that civilizations aren't undone solely by invaders or disasters sometimes. They're undone by the quiet, insidious habit of standing still. Their cities didn't collapse because they forgot how to build. They collapsed because they forgot how to dream. The disappearance of the Indus Valley people doesn't necessarily mean they vanished from the earth. New evidence suggests a different story, one not of abrupt extinction, but of slow, determined migration. Archaeologists tracing pottery styles across the subcontinent have uncovered a fascinating trail. Distinctive black and red ware pottery, once unique to the Indus region, begins appearing further east over centuries, dotting settlements along the Ganges plain like breadcrumbs left by a civilization on the move. These weren't random imitations. The clay composition, firing techniques, and even decorative motifs match earlier Indus Valley designs with uncanny precision. It's as if we're watching cultural knowledge being carried forward, piece by piece, into new lands. Genetic studies add another layer to this puzzle. Modern populations in northern India show startling genetic continuity with ancient Indus Valley skeletons, particularly in mitochondrial DNA passed down through maternal lines. This suggests entire families, not just scattered individuals, undertook this eastward journey. Picture groups of farmers and artisans packing their tools, driving their livestock, and following receding water sources toward the monsoon-fed rivers of the Ganges basin. Unlike the sudden collapses depicted in history books, this was likely a generational retreat, with each season's failed harvest pushing communities further from their ancestral homes. Integration wouldn't have been easy. The Ganges plain was already home to smaller Chalcolithic cultures with their own traditions. Yet instead of conflict, the archaeological record shows something remarkable: a blending. Indus-style weights and measures appear alongside local pottery, suggesting trade networks persisted even as political structures fractured. Some settlements show hybrid architecture, combining the Indus preference for baked bricks with regional wood-building techniques. This wasn't conquest or replacement, it was cultural negotiation, as displaced people adapted their urban expertise to new environments while preserving core elements of their identity. The human dimension of this exodus often gets lost in scholarly debates. These weren't faceless migrants, but parents teaching children how to shape clay in the old way, healers carrying knowledge of medicinal plants, or storytellers keeping ancestral tales alive around new hearths. A poignant clue comes from cooking practices. At sites like Alamgapur near modern Delhi, archaeologists found hearths containing charred grains of both Indus staples like barley and local millets, a quiet testament to shared meals between newcomers and host communities. Food, that most intimate of cultural markers, became a bridge between worlds. This theory transforms our understanding of the civilization's end. Rather than a dramatic fall, we see resilience, a people scattering like seeds in the wind, taking root wherever the soil allowed. Some groups may have merged with emerging Vedic cultures, their contributions blending into what would later become Hindu traditions. Others perhaps formed the backbone of early urban centers like Hastinapur, laying foundations for India's next great civilizations. The Indus Valley people didn't just disappear, they became part of the subcontinent's living tapestry, their legacy woven into languages, rituals, and daily practices that endure to this day. Their story isn't one of defeat, but of metamorphosis, proof that even when cities crumble, cultures find ways to endure. Among the most tantalizing artifacts left by the Indus Valley people are their small, square seals, intricately carved stones depicting animals, symbols, and occasionally human-like figures. One seal in particular has sparked decades of debate. a seated figure surrounded by animals, legs crossed in what looks unmistakably like a yogic posture, with what may be horns or a headdress crowning its head. To many scholars, this is no ordinary image. It bears a striking resemblance to later depictions of the Hindu god Shiva, known as Pashupati, the Lord of Beasts. Could this be proof that the spiritual roots of Hinduism stretch back thousands of years earlier than previously thought? The implications are profound. Rather than vanishing, the Indus Valley's sacred traditions might have quietly woven themselves into the fabric of South Asia's religious tapestry. Look closer at the symbolism. The figure's association with animals, a tiger, elephant, and buffalo, appear on the seal, mirrors Shiva's role as both protector and master of the natural world. The seated posture echoes the meditative asanas practiced by yogis for millennia. Even the possible horns or crescent moon headdress finds parallels in Shiva's iconography, where the crescent moon often adorns his hair. These aren't vague similarities, they're threads connecting two worlds separated by centuries. Later Hindu texts describe Shiva as both destroyer and regenerator, a deity who dissolves old forms to make way for new creation. Isn't it poetic, then, that the civilization associated with this proto-Shiva figure didn't truly end but transformed? The spiritual continuity extends beyond a single seal. Other artifacts hint at rituals that would feel familiar to modern Hindus. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, with its precise engineering and apparent ceremonial use, evokes the sacred tanks found beside temples today, where devotees perform ablutions before prayer. Clay figurines of a mother goddess, her hips wide and adorned with jewelry, resemble later depictions of fertility deities like Devi or Parvati. Even the reverence for water, so central to Indus Valley life, finds echoes in Hinduism's sacred rivers, where pilgrims still gather to wash away sins. These parallels suggest something extraordinary, that the spiritual imagination of the Indus people didn't die with their cities. It adapted, merged with new influences, and resurfaced in forms that still resonate across the subcontinent. This isn't to say Hinduism simply copied Indus Valley beliefs. Religions evolve like living organisms, absorbing and discarding elements over time. The Vedic traditions brought by the Aryans introduced new gods, rituals, and philosophies. Yet the endurance of certain Indus motifs, the meditative ascetic, the life-giving goddess, the purifying power of water, hints at a cultural conversation spanning millennia. Perhaps the Aryans didn't replace indigenous spirituality so much as blend with it, creating something new from the collision of worldviews. After all, the Rigveda itself contains hymns that might describe the Saraswati River's decline, suggesting these newcomers weren't just conquerors, but witnesses to the same environmental changes that reshaped the Indus world. The most radical idea here isn't about religion, it's how we define a civilization's end. If the essence of the Indus Valley people lived on in rituals, symbols, and stories, can we really say they disappeared? Their cities may have emptied, their scripts faded, but the heartbeat of their spiritual life continued, pulsing through the centuries in temple dances, festival songs, and the whispered mantras of countless generations. The seated figure on that ancient seal didn't vanish. It simply stepped out of one era and into another, a silent traveler across time. In this light, the Indus Valley's legacy isn't measured in ruined bricks or abandoned wells, but in the unbroken thread of human reverence, connecting those who once bathed in the Great Bath to the pilgrims who today dip their hands into the Ganges. Some disappearances aren't endings at all, they are metamorphoses, where the past doesn't die but dissolves like salt in water, invisible yet eternally present. The mystery of the Indus Valley script is like a locked door, one that scholars have been trying to open for over a century. The Those tiny, square seals covered in elegant symbols hold what might be the earliest writing in South Asia, yet their meaning remains just out of reach. But here's the fascinating part. Some of those symbols bear an uncanny resemblance to later Brahmi script, the ancestor of nearly every modern Indian alphabet. Take the fish-like symbol found on Indus seals. It's strikingly similar to Brahmi's letter for ma, and in later Sanskrit, the word for fish, matsya, starts with that very sound. Coincidence, or could this be a whisper of knowledge passed down through generations, preserved even when the original language was lost? Linguists like Asko Parpola have spent decades mapping these connections, tracing how certain Indus signs seem to morph into Brahmi characters over time. The looping symbol for dha, the angular mark for ta, each one finds echoes across the centuries, like a cultural game of telephone where the message changes slightly but never fully disappears. Even more compelling is how these symbols cluster in ways that mirror later writing systems. Indus inscriptions often place specific signs at the beginning or end of sequences, much like Brahma's use of prefixes and suffixes. It's as if the skeleton of the script survived, even if the flesh of its language faded away. This isn't just about shapes on clay, it's about the resilience of human communication. Without a Rosetta Stone to decipher the Indus script, scholars turn to living traditions for clues. In parts of rural India, potters still mark their wares with symbols astonishingly close to those ancient seals. Folk artists in Gujarat draw ritual designs passed down through families, their swirling patterns mirroring motifs from 4,000 years ago. These aren't direct translations, but they hint at something profound. That knowledge can endure even when formal writing disappears, carried forward in the rhythms of daily life and the muscle memory of craft. The real breakthrough might lie in bridging the tangible and intangible. While the Indus script remains unreadable, the oral traditions of South Asia pulse with linguistic fossils. Vedic hymns recited with pinpoint accuracy for millennia preserve not just words but cadences, phonetic patterns that might someday help crack the code. When a Tamil poet recites verses composed 2,000 years ago or a priest chants Sanskrit mantras unchanged since antiquity, they're participating in the same unbroken chain that once included the scribes of Mohenjo-Daro. Writing systems may rise and fall, but the human voice can carry echoes across unimaginable stretches of time. What emerges from this puzzle isn't just a trail of symbols, it's a testament to cultural endurance. The Indus Valley people may have stopped carving their seals, but their legacy didn't vanish. It seeped into the bedrock of South Asian identity, resurfacing in scripts, songs, and stories that still shape the region today. Every time a child in modern India learns the Brahmi-derived alphabet, they're touching the frayed edge of a thread that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. The script may be silent, but its echoes refuse to fade. The story of the Indus Valley isn't unique, it's part of a pattern woven through human history, where civilizations reach dazzling heights only to fracture under the weight of their own complexity. Take the Maya, whose towering pyramids still rise from the jungles of Central America. Like the Indus Valley people, they were master engineers, astronomers, and artists, building cities that thrived for centuries. Yet by the 9th century CE, their great urban centers were being reclaimed by the forest. Sound familiar? The parallels are striking. Both cultures faced environmental stress, the Maya from prolonged droughts, the Indus Valley from shifting rivers. Both saw their tightly organized societies strain as resources dwindled, trade networks faltered, and the social contracts that held everything together began to unravel. But the most chilling similarity lies in how these collapses weren't caused by any single disaster. The Maya didn't vanish because of drought alone. they were also weakened by overpopulation, deforestation, and political infighting. Inscriptions on their monuments tell of once loyal city-states turning on each other as desperation grew. The Indus Valley, too, likely faced a perfect storm, rivers drying up, diseases spreading, and a decentralized system that struggled to coordinate large-scale responses. These weren't sudden apocalypses, but slow-motion unravelings where each new crisis amplified the last. The Bronze Age Mediterranean offers another mirror. Around 1200 BCE, nearly every major civilization from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia collapsed within decades, an event so dramatic historians call it the Late Bronze Age Systems Collapse. Climate change again played a role, with tree rings revealing years of punishing drought. But what turned hardship into catastrophe was how interconnected these societies had become. When trade routes snapped, the entire region's economy shuddered. Specialized workers from scribes to bronze smiths found their skills suddenly useless without the systems that supported them. The Indus Valley's far-flung trade with Mesopotamia might have made them similarly vulnerable. A disruption in the flow of tin or copper wouldn't just inconvenience merchants, it could cripple entire industries. What binds these collapses together isn't just tragedy, but a warning about complexity. Advanced societies build intricate systems, trade networks, irrigation, governance, that work brilliantly until they don't. The Mayas' reliance on seasonal rains for their reservoirs, the Bronze Age kingdom's dependence on scarce tin for bronze, the Indus Valley's meticulous urban planning, all were marvels of their time, yet all contained the seeds of fragility. When the environment shifted or shocks cascaded through the system, these civilizations didn't have backup plans. They'd optimized for stability in a world that's anything but stable. Yet there's a crucial difference in how these stories end. The Maya didn't disappear, their descendants still live across Central America, preserving languages and traditions that stretch back millennia. Similarly, the Indus Valley's legacy likely flowed into later South Asian cultures. Even the Bronze Age collapse, for all its devastation, paved the way for the Iron Age and classical civilizations. These weren't true extinctions, but transformations, sometimes brutal, often messy, but never final. The lesson isn't that civilizations are doomed to fail, but that resilience lies in adaptability. When one way of living becomes unsustainable, the answer isn't to cling harder, it's to change. This is where the Indus Valley's mystery becomes more than academic. Their story, like those of the Maya and Bronze Age worlds, forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own civilization. How many of our systems just as ingenious in their time as Mohenjo-Daro's drains or the Maya's calendars contain hidden vulnerabilities? What happens when the resources we take for granted become scarce, or the networks that feed our cities fracture? The past doesn't offer blueprints, but it does provide perspective. These ancient collapses remind us that no society, no matter how advanced, is immune to the twin forces of environmental change and human choices. The difference this time, we're the first civilization with the knowledge to see these patterns, and perhaps the wisdom to rewrite the ending. Climate models paint a stark picture of the world the Indus Valley people faced in their final centuries. Around 1900 BC, deep beneath the ocean floor near the Arabian Sea, tiny fossilized plankton began secreting a silent warning. Their calcium carbonate shells, analyzed millennia later by scientists, record a dramatic shift in monsoon patterns. The life-giving rains that fed the Indus and its tributaries grew weaker, more erratic. What might seem like a minor fluctuation in weather had catastrophic consequences. These weren't just summer showers. The monsoons were the heartbeat of the civilization's agriculture, refilling rivers and soaking the plains where farmers grew wheat, barley, and sesame. When those rains faltered, the entire ecosystem shuddered. The data reveals a cruel irony. The Indus Valley people had mastered water management like few others, building reservoirs and canals to harness seasonal floods. But their systems relied on predictability, the assumption that rivers would rise and fall within known ranges. As monsoons weakened, satellite imagery of ancient riverbeds shows the Gaga Hakra, once a roaring torrent, shrinking into scattered pools. Computer simulations suggest even a 10% reduction in rainfall could have slashed crop yields by half. Imagine entire harvests withering in the fields, grain stores emptying, and the once bustling markets of Mohenjo-Daro growing quiet as hunger spread. Archaeologists find evidence of this desperation in the bones of the people themselves. Skeletons from this period show signs of chronic malnutrition, with children's growth stunted by years of scarcity. What makes this climate shift particularly devastating is its timing. The weakening monsoons didn't happen in isolation. They coincided with a global event scientists call the 4.2 kiloyear drought. Ice cores from Greenland, sediment layers in African lakes, and even Chinese cave formations all tell the same story. A planet-wide dry period that toppled empires from Egypt to Mesopotamia. But the Indus Valley, with its heavy reliance on a single river system, was uniquely vulnerable. While Egyptians could shift farming to the Nile's floodplains, and Mesopotamians dug emergency canals, the Indus people faced a grimmer calculus. Their cities were precision machines built for a specific climate, one that was vanishing before their eyes. The most haunting insight comes from pollen samples preserved in ancient mud. As the drought intensified, tree pollen gives way to hardy desert shrubs, then disappears altogether. Dust storms that once raged seasonally became relentless, burying fields under layers of sterile silt. At the site of Kalibangan, archaeologists found plow marks frozen in time, their furrows filled not with seeds but with wind-blown sand, a snapshot of the moment the land gave up. Yet even in collapse there are glimpses of resilience. Some communities adapted, switching from wheat to drought-resistant millet. Others migrated eastward, following the retreating rains toward the Ganges basin. Their story isn't just one of defeat, but of human ingenuity pressed to its limits. The climate didn't kill the Indus Valley Civilization outright, it set the stage for a slow unraveling, where every bad harvest, every dried-up well, and every hungry season chipped away at the bonds holding their world together. This scientific evidence transforms the mystery from a historical curiosity into a cautionary tale. The same climate models that decode the past also illuminate our future. Today, as modern monsoons grow increasingly erratic, the fate of the Indus Valley reminds us that civilizations, no matter how advanced, are ultimately built on fragile agreements with the natural world. Their cities didn't fall to invaders or revolt, but to something far more implacable. A shift in the wind, a failure of the rains, the quiet betrayal of the seasons they had trusted for generations. In the end, their greatest adversary wasn't a human enemy, but the changing sky itself. For decades, the Indus Valley Civilization was celebrated as a rare beacon of peace in the ancient world, a society so harmonious it needed no armies, no fortifications, no weapons of war. But recent discoveries are chipping away at this idyllic image, revealing a darker chapter written in bronze and bone. In the crumbling layers of late-period Indus cities, archaeologists have unearthed something startling: stockpiles of spearheads, daggers, and arrowheads, all dating to the civilization's twilight years. These aren't the scattered tools of hunters or ceremonial objects. They're weapons crafted with lethal precision, and their sudden appearance speaks volumes. After centuries of apparent tranquility, did the people of the Indus Valley finally reach a breaking point where survival meant turning on each other? Examine these artifacts closely, and the story becomes even more compelling. Unlike earlier periods where metalwork focused on jewelry and tools, late Indus workshops show a clear shift toward mass-producing weapons. At the site of Dolavera, crucibles used for casting bronze spearheads outnumber those for making agricultural implements. In Lothal, a once thriving port city, archaeologists found a cache of sling stones stacked neatly near the city gates, not scattered by time but deliberately placed as if ready for defense. Most telling of all are human remains from this era. While earlier Indus graves show no signs of violence, skeletons from the final centuries bear unmistakable wounds, skulls fractured by blunt force, ribs pierced by projectile points, forearms raised in futile attempts to block fatal blows. These aren't the marks of ritual sacrifice or accidents, they're the scars of combat. The timing of this militarization is no coincidence. It aligns perfectly with the environmental crises that were squeezing the civilization dry. As rivers dwindled and harvests failed, the very resources that once bound communities together, water, fertile land, trade goods became prizes worth fighting over. Satellite imagery shows abandoned farmsteads clustered around the last reliable water sources, suggesting desperate consolidation. At the same time, the famous standardization of weights and measures, once the hallmark of their fair trade system, begins to break down. Excavations reveal counterfeit weights made of cheaper materials, as if the old rules of trust were crumbling under the pressure of scarcity. What's chilling is how this mirrors other collapses throughout history. The classic Maya, when faced with drought, didn't unite, they fractured, with city-states waging brutal wars over dwindling reservoirs. The Akkadian Empire disintegrated into warlordism when the Tigris and Euphrates shifted course. Even the Norse Greenlanders, as their settlements froze, turned on each other in their final winters. The pattern is clear. When survival is at stake, even the most peaceful societies can descend into chaos. For the Indus Valley people, their greatest achievement, a civilization built on cooperation, may have become their fatal flaw when crisis hit. Without centralized authority or standing armies to enforce order, competing groups might have splintered into factions, each fighting to control what little remained. Yet this isn't just a story of mindless violence. The weapons themselves tell a nuanced tale. Many spearheads show signs of being repaired and reused, suggesting scarcity of metal. Some arrowheads were crafted from bone or flint, materials that wouldn't require precious bronze. Even in conflict, the Indus people were adapting, making do with less. And not all settlements show signs of warfare. Some smaller villages appear to have been abandoned peacefully, their doors left ajar, their valuables carried away. This patchwork of violence and exodus paints a complex picture, not a single catastrophic war, but a slow unraveling where some communities fought while others fled, where old alliances fractured along new fault lines of desperation. The most haunting question isn't whether the Indus Valley people turned violent, it's what that violence cost them. A civilization that thrived on shared prosperity, on collective projects like the Great Bath and citywide drainage systems, couldn't sustain such cooperation in the face of hunger and thirst. The weapons they left behind are more than artifacts, they're silent witnesses to a terrible transformation, where a society that once measured fairness with standardized weights found itself measuring survival by the edge of a blade. Their descent into conflict wasn't inevitable, but it was tragically human, a reminder that even the noblest civilizations can be undone when the wells run dry and the bread runs out. The Indus Valley's final lesson might be this: peace is easy when the rivers are full, but the true test of a society comes when the water disappears. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro tell a silent story, one that defies the dramatic imagery of a civilization collapsing in flames or chaos. Walk through its empty streets and you won't find the scorched marks of invaders, the shattered remnants of battle, or the frantic clutter of sudden flight. Instead, the artifacts left behind whisper of something far more deliberate. Precious materials like jewelry and tools are conspicuously absent, as if carefully carried away. Household items sit undisturbed in some rooms, suggesting orderly departure rather than panic. Even the famous massacre layer skeletons, once thought to signal violent upheaval, now appear to be isolated burials spread across centuries. Could this be evidence not of a catastrophic fall, but of a society making the difficult choice to leave, methodically and with purpose? This quiet exodus challenges everything we assume about how civilizations end. We're conditioned to imagine apocalyptic scenarios: cities sacked, populations slaughtered, cultures erased overnight, but the Indus Valley hints at a different narrative. In later layers of excavation, buildings show signs of gradual disrepair, not destruction. Streets once meticulously maintained become uneven, their bricks loosening over time. The Great Bath, that marvel of hydraulic engineering, was slowly filled with debris rather than violently ruined. These aren't the marks of a society suddenly crushed, but one winding down, its people dispersing like water seeping into dry earth. Archaeologists point to an even more telling clue: the strategic reuse of materials. At Harappa, bricks from abandoned structures were systematically salvaged for new construction elsewhere. This wasn't looting, it was careful recycling, evidence of communities adapting rather than fleeing. Even the famed drainage systems, though neglected, weren't destroyed. They simply stopped being maintained, their slow clogging mirroring the civilization's measured retreat. Compare this to the fiery destruction layers of Mesopotamia or the sacked cities of the Bronze Age, where valuables were left strewn in the streets amid evidence of violent conflict. The Indus Valley's departure lacks that desperation. The implications are profound. If the Indus people left deliberately, it suggests a level of collective decision-making rare in the ancient world. Imagine councils gathering to discuss dwindling harvests, elders weighing the merits of staying versus migrating, families packing only what they could carry with quiet resolve. This wouldn't have been a single exodus, but waves of departures as conditions worsened, some groups heading east toward the Ganges basin, others south to the coasts, each carrying fragments of their culture into new lands. Their legacy wouldn't vanish, it would scatter like seeds carried on the wind, taking root in different soils. This theory transforms the narrative from tragedy to transformation. Civilizations don't always die sometimes, they simply change shape. The absence of apocalyptic destruction in the Indus Valley suggests resilience, not weakness. Their cities may have emptied, but their knowledge, traditions, and even bloodlines likely endured in the villages and cultures that followed. The end of urban life doesn't have to mean the end of a people. In the quiet ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, we might be seeing not a tombstone, but a crossroads, a place where a civilization paused, then chose a different path forward. One of the most persistent myths about collapsing civilizations is the idea that elites, those in power, always abandon ship when disaster strikes, leaving ordinary people to fend for themselves. But the Indus Valley shatters that assumption in fascinating ways. Unlike the pharaohs of Egypt or the kings of Mesopotamia, there's no evidence of a ruling class hoarding wealth in grand palaces while their cities crumbled. No treasure-filled tombs, no towering monuments to ego, just the same standardized bricks, the same shared infrastructure, suggesting a society where leadership might have been more about stewardship than domination. So if there were elites, what role did they play in the civilization's decline? Did they fail their people, or was their very absence part of the problem? The archaeological record offers conflicting clues. On one hand, the famed uniformity of Indus cities, their identical weights, their carefully planned neighborhoods implies some form of central coordination. Someone had to enforce those standards, to organize the labor that built those perfect grid streets and citywide drainage systems. Yet there's no trace of the usual trappings of top-down control. No royal iconography, no grand administrative complexes, no caches of luxury goods reserved for the privileged few. Even in the civilization's twilight, when societies often become more unequal, the material culture stays strikingly consistent. The richest graves contain nothing more than a few extra pots or beads, hardly the excess we'd expect from a detached elite fleeing crisis. This raises a provocative possibility that the Indus Valley's leadership wasn't a ruling class at all, but something closer to a guild of engineers, planners, and trade administrators. Picture councils of elders or skilled artisans making collective decisions, their authority earned through competence rather than inherited status. In good times, this system worked beautifully, efficient, fair, and adaptable. But when the rivers dried up and trade routes collapsed, this very egalitarianism might have become a liability. Without a centralized authority to ration food, coordinate migrations, or enforce emergency measures, communities could have fractured under the strain. Compare this to other ancient collapses. When drought struck Egypt, pharaohs mobilized labor to dig canals and redistribute grain. When Rome faced crisis, emperors, for all their flaws, could command legions to secure supply lines. But the Indus Valley's diffuse power structure, so effective in maintaining peace and prosperity, may have lacked the tools to manage catastrophe. There's no evidence of granaries being guarded or water supplies being prioritized, just a slow unraveling as each neighborhood, each family, made individual choices to stay or leave. Yet there's another side to this story. Recent excavations at smaller Indus sites reveal something unexpected. Clusters of high-quality artifacts in certain neighborhoods, suggesting emerging inequalities in the civilization's final centuries. A few seals carved with exceptional skill, homes slightly larger than their neighbors, pottery imported from farther away. Could these hint at a nascent elite forming as resources grew scarce? It's a pattern seen in other collapsing societies when survival becomes precarious. Hierarchies often harden. Those with knowledge of trade routes or control over remaining water sources might have gained outsized influence, not through formal power but through desperate dependence. The real tragedy is that this shift came too late. By the time informal leaders emerged, the systems that sustained the civilization were already beyond repair. Unlike the Maya, where kings could rally resources for one last building project before collapse, or the Romans, who staggered on for centuries through bureaucratic inertia, the Indus Valley had no fallback structure. Their greatest strength, shared responsibility, became a fatal weakness when shared suffering demanded coordinated sacrifice. This isn't just ancient history. It's a lesson about the price of equitable societies in times of crisis. The Indus Valley people built a world where no single person or group held disproportionate power, a remarkable achievement. But when the monsoons failed and the rivers vanished, that same equality may have left them with no one to make the hard choices, no one to bear the blame, and ultimately, no one to lead the way forward. Their silence speaks volumes. Sometimes the absence of elites can be as destabilizing as their excess. Bones don't lie, and in the ruins of the Indus Valley's later settlements, they tell a troubling story. Archaeologists sifting through the layers of time notice a sharp decline in the remains of domesticated animals like cows, sheep, and goats. In the civilization's golden age, these creatures were everywhere, integral to daily life, providing milk, meat, leather, and muscle for plowing fields. But as the centuries passed, their presence dwindled. By the final phases of Mohenjo-Daro, livestock bones become as rare as monsoon rains in a drought. This wasn't just a shift in diet, it was the unraveling of an entire agricultural system, one that had sustained cities for generations. The implications ripple outward. Fewer animals meant fewer plows turning the soil, shrinking harvests even as mouths to feed multiplied. Without oxen to pull carts, trade routes sputtered, cutting off supplies of vital goods like timber and metal. But the most devastating loss might have been protein. Human skeletons from this period show signs of chronic malnutrition, stunted growth in children, brittle bones in adults, evidence of a population pushed to the brink. Imagine mothers thinning their own portions to feed their families, or laborers too weakened by hunger to maintain the intricate drainage systems that once defined their cities. A civilization that mastered urban planning couldn't outsmart empty stomachs. Deeper still, this decline hints at a broken contract between humans and the land. The Indus Valley people didn't just raise animals, they bred them with care, selecting traits over generations to create hardy, productive livestock. The sudden absence of these creatures suggests something darker than mere scarcity. Perhaps grasslands turned to desert, leaving herds to starve, or maybe desperate communities slaughtered their breeding stock during famines, sacrificing tomorrow's food for today's survival. At the site of Rakagahi, researchers found butchered bones of young calves, a heartbreaking clue to short-term thinking born of desperation. When people start eating the future, collapse isn't far behind. This agricultural crisis didn't happen in isolation. It intertwined with every other system failing around it. No animals meant no dung for fertilizer, further crippling crop yields. Fewer hides meant less leather for bellows, stifling metalworking just when tools were needed most. Even religion suffered. The iconic seals depicting bulls and buffaloes, once symbols of divine power, vanish from later artifacts as if the gods themselves had turned away. The Indus Valley's genius lay in its interconnectedness, but that very web of dependencies became a trap. Like a table losing one leg after another, the civilization wobbled, then fell. Yet in this bleak picture, there's a glimmer of human resilience. Some communities adapted, turning to fishing or foraging. At the coastal settlement of Balakot, archaeologists found piles of mollusk shells in late-period ruins, a stark shift from grain-heavy diets. Others may have embraced pastoralism, driving remaining herds toward greener pastures in a slow migration eastward. These weren't passive victims of fate. They were problem solvers until the end, rewriting the rules of survival even as their world crumbled. The lesson here isn't just about fragility, it's about the creativity that flickers in the darkest hours, proof that even collapsing civilizations don't go quietly into the night. Buried deep in the archives of ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets whisper of a distant land called Meluha, a place of exotic treasures and mysterious traders. For centuries, Mesopotamian scribes recorded shipments of carnelian beads, ivory combs, and fragrant woods arriving from this fabled region, widely believed to be the Indus Valley Civilization. These weren't just casual exchanges, they were the lifeblood of a transcontinental partnership, with Indus merchants sailing thousands of miles to trade in the bustling ports of and Lagash. Then, around 1900 BC, the records fall silent. Meluha vanishes from Mesopotamian accounts as abruptly as a ship swallowed by fog. What happened to this vital connection? Did the collapse of trade strangle the Indus economy, or could foreign contact itself have sown the seeds of their undoing? The scale of this trade was staggering. At the height of their partnership, Indus goods weren't just luxuries, they were status symbols coveted by Mesopotamian elites. A single cuneiform tablet from the reign of King Sargon boasts of Meluhan ships docking with mountains of black wood and lapis like the night sky. Indus seals, those intricate carved stones used to mark goods, have been found in Mesopotamian cities, sometimes repurposed as amulets or curiosities. This wasn't just commerce, it was cultural exchange on a grand scale, with Indus merchants possibly settling in foreign ports and bringing back Mesopotamian tin and textiles to fuel their own industries. The sudden severing of this relationship would have sent shockwaves through both civilizations, but here's where the mystery deepens. While Mesopotamian texts stopped mentioning Meluha, archaeological evidence suggests trade didn't disappear entirely, it transformed. Later Indus settlements show cruder versions of once exquisite beads, as if skilled artisans had vanished and their replacements lacked proper training. Copper, always scarce in the Indus Valley, became rationed like treasure, with tools being melted down and reforged repeatedly. Most telling are the counterfeit weights found in Lothal's ruins, clay imitations of the famous standardized stone weights, carefully weighted with lead inserts. These fakes hint at a breakdown in the systems that once made Indus trade so trustworthy. A civilization built on precision was now cutting corners to survive. Could foreign contact itself have contributed to this unraveling? Some scholars point to unsettling clues. In the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro's later layers, a handful of Mesopotamian-style cylinder seals appear alongside traditional Indus artifacts. These exotic objects, with their distinct rolling designs, suggest the presence of outsiders in the heart of the civilization. More ominously, skeletal remains from this period show a spike in skeletal trauma, not the widespread violence of invasion, but isolated incidents that could point to tensions between locals and newcomers. One particularly grisly find, a group burial containing both Indus-style pottery and a Mesopotamian-style dagger, its blade still wedged in a ribcage. The truth likely lies somewhere between trade and threat. The Indus Valley's decentralized structure, so effective in peacetime, may have struggled to regulate foreign interactions as crises mounted. Without strong central authority to monitor ports or enforce trade agreements, opportunistic outsiders could have exploited weakening systems. Imagine unscrupulous merchants bypassing established trade routes, or desperate Indus cities bartering away vital resources for short-term survival. The civilization's famed egalitarianism, once a strength, might have left them vulnerable to external pressures that more hierarchical societies could resist. Yet the greatest tragedy isn't that trade collapsed, it's what its absence meant for everyday life. As imported tin dwindled, bronze tools grew rarer, forcing farmers to till fields with worn-out implements. Without Mesopotamian silver, the carefully balanced weight system faltered, undermining the fairness that once defined Indus markets. Even something as simple as the disappearance of foreign timber would have crippled shipbuilding, severing not just trade but fishing communities' access to protein. The Indus Valley didn't just lose business partners, they lost the intricate web of materials, ideas, and innovations that had sustained their urban experiment. This isn't just an ancient story. The fate of Meluha and Mesopotamia mirrors modern anxieties about globalization's fragility. When supply chains snap, when trusted partners vanish, even the most advanced societies can teeter. The Indus people remind us that civilizations aren't isolated islands, they're nodes in a vast, trembling network. Their greatest achievements were built on connections, and when those connections frayed, no amount of brilliant engineering could save them. The silence of the Meluhan trade wasn't just a symptom of decline, it was a death knell echoing across an emptying world. The Indus Valley cities were marvels of precision. Streets laid out in perfect grids, houses built with identical bricks, drainage systems that functioned like clockwork. But what served them well in times of stability became a straitjacket when crisis hit. Imagine a city designed like a machine, every part interdependent, suddenly forced to adapt to unpredictable monsoons and shifting rivers. Their rigid urban templates, so effective for managing routine floods, left little room for improvisation when those floods stopped coming. Archaeologists find later neighborhoods cramming makeshift shelters into spaces meant for orderly drainage. Their haphazard layouts a stark departure from the civilization's famed symmetry. This wasn't just aesthetic decline, it was a system breaking under its own perfection. Compare this to rural settlements on the civilization's fringes. At sites like Kunnal and Banawali, smaller communities thrived long after the great cities faltered. Their secret flexibility, without elaborate sewer systems, they could dig new wells wherever water lingered. Unbound by standardized bricks, they built with whatever materials were at hand: mud, reeds, even salvaged stones. Most crucially, their livelihoods weren't tied to urban industries. When trade collapsed, farmers could switch crops, herders could move flocks. The Indus Valley's urban elites, for all their engineering prowess, had no such options. Specialization, their greatest strength, became a fatal vulnerability when the world they'd optimized for ceased to exist. The contrast reveals a painful irony. The very innovations that made the civilization extraordinary, mass-produced bricks, citywide water management, centralized grain storage, required unwavering stability. Like a skyscraper built on bedrock, their brilliance depended on conditions that ultimately shifted beneath them. Meanwhile, the backward villages, with their adaptable huts and diverse subsistence strategies, endured precisely because they'd never invested in brittle complexity. A farmer planting drought-resistant millet beside a riverbank in 1900 BC stood a better chance than an urban baker relying on grain shipments from a failing administrative hub. This isn't just ancient history, it's a parable for modern infrastructure. Today's megacities, with their reliance on global supply chains and centralized utilities, mirror the Indus Valley's precarious brilliance. When Cape Town faced its Day Zero water crisis or Texas power grid failed during a freeze, the parallels were unsettling. Societies that build for efficiency often forget to build for resilience, favoring streamlined systems over redundant ones. The Indus people remind us that infrastructure isn't just about solving today's problems, it's about anticipating tomorrow's chaos. Their meticulously planned cities worked flawlessly until the moment they didn't, collapsing not from lack of ingenuity, but from an inability to deviate from the blueprint when the world demanded something new. Yet buried in their failure is an unexpected hope. The rural communities that outlasted the Indus collapse did so by embracing imperfection, mixing crops, diversifying skills, staying light on their feet. In our age of climate uncertainty, their example resonates. Perhaps true progress isn't about eliminating all variables, but learning to dance with them. The Indus Valley's ghostly grid plans, frozen in time, stand as both a monument to human achievement and a warning. The most elegant systems are often the most fragile. Sometimes survival belongs not to the architects of perfection, but to the improvising survivors who know when to abandon the plan. Walk through the streets of modern-day Gujarat or Punjab, and you might unknowingly brush against fragments of a civilization that flourished 4,000 years ago. The past lingers not in grand monuments, but in subtle traditions woven into daily life. Take the reverence for bulls, a sacred symbol in Hinduism today, where Nandi the bull serves as Shiva's devoted companion. This veneration isn't just spiritual, it's an echo of the Indus Valley, where bull motifs dominate seals and figurines. The continuity is uncanny. The same powerful humped bulls depicted on ancient artifacts now stand carved in temple courtyards, their forms nearly identical across millennia. Even the ritual bathing tanks beside Hindu shrines mirror the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, suggesting an unbroken thread linking modern worship to ancient practicality. Deeper still, the Indus legacy pulses through South Asia's urban DNA. Modern Indian cities like Patna and Delhi, for all their chaos, still rely on centralized water distribution systems reminiscent of Indus engineering. Step into old Delhi's Chandni Chowk, and beneath the bustling market lies a network of underground channels not so different from the terracotta pipes that once carried water through Harappa's streets. The similarities extend to craftsmanship. Artisans in Rajasthan still produce carnelian beads using techniques nearly identical to those found in Lothal's workshops, their hands moving in rhythms passed down through generations. These aren't coincidences, they're cultural inheritance, surviving not in textbooks but in muscle memory and daily practice. Even language holds traces of this ancient past. The word Nadi, meaning river in Hindi and other Indo-Aryan languages, bears a striking resemblance to the Nad sound found in Indus Valley place names. Folk songs in Sindh and Punjab describe rivers with metaphors that mirror descriptions in the Rigveda, a possible bridge between the Indus people and later cultures. The persistence goes deeper than words. Rural festivals celebrating monsoon rains often feature clay figurines of fertility goddesses, their curvaceous forms eerily similar to Indus terracotta figures. When a Punjabi farmer today offers milk to a cobra, a ritual with no clear Vedic origin, he might unknowingly reenact traditions older than recorded history. The most profound continuity, however, lies in social values. The Indus Valley's apparent egalitarianism, with its lack of grand palaces or warrior king iconography, finds echoes in South Asia's enduring village councils and community-led water management. In Rajasthan's Johad system, villagers collectively harvest rainwater using methods that would feel familiar to Indus farmers. The civilization's emphasis on trade and craftsmanship persists too, with India's historic bazaar culture prioritizing negotiation and trust values once encoded in those standardized weights and measures. What we're seeing isn't just survival of artifacts, but of worldview, a preference for collective problem solving over authoritarian rule, for practicality alongside spirituality. This hidden lineage challenges our definition of collapse. Cultures don't end when their cities empty, they transform, seeping into the bedrock of later societies. The Indus Valley people didn't vanish, they became invisible, their innovations so thoroughly absorbed that we no longer recognize their origins. Like a river that disappears underground only to resurface miles away, their influence flows through time, unseen but essential. Their greatest monument isn't crumbling brick, it's the living traditions of a billion people who still, in ways both subtle and profound, walk paths first laid by those ancient planners and dreamers. The past never really dies, it simply wears new names. The story of the Indus Valley Civilization doesn't end with a single catastrophic event. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads of change, adaptation, and resilience. Environmental shifts likely played a starring role. The once mighty Saraswati River's disappearance would have shattered the agricultural backbone of their society, turning fertile plains into dust. Yet climate alone doesn't explain everything. Economic strain crept in as trade routes faltered, leaving workshops without copper and markets without goods. The standardized weights that once symbolized fairness began collecting dust, replaced by counterfeit imitations, a quiet testament to a system losing its grip. And then there's the cultural transformation, perhaps the most fascinating thread of all. The people didn't vanish, they scattered, carrying fragments of their identity into new lands, where their reverence for water, their craftsmanship, even their spiritual symbols quietly seeped into the roots of later civilizations. What makes this mystery so compelling isn't just the question of why they declined, but how their legacy persisted. The dancing girl figurine, the yogic postures on their seals, the echoes of their urban planning in modern South Asian cities, these aren't just artifacts. They're whispers across time, a proof that collapse isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's a metamorphosis. Archaeologists still debate the details, uncovering new clues with each dig. Maybe you've seen recent headlines about satellite imagery revealing lost settlements, or genetic studies tracing Indus ancestry in modern populations. This story is still being written, and you can be part of it. Visit an exhibition, follow an excavation's progress online, or dive into the lively debates in the comments below. What's your theory? There's a haunting relevance to this ancient tale. Today, as we face our own climate crises and societal fractures, the Indus Valley offers more than just history, it's a mirror. Their carefully planned cities, so resilient in stability yet fragile in change, remind us that no civilization is immune to the forces of nature or the weight of its own choices. But their story also carries hope. They didn't just disappear, they adapted, merged, and endured. In the end, the Indus Valley's greatest lesson might be this: collapse isn't about erasure. It's about transformation, about what lingers when the bricks have crumbled, and how the quietest legacies often run the deepest.